It always begins quietly. A glance that lingers too long, a laugh with just the wrong tone, a comment disguised as a joke but aimed right at you. Most people ignore it. They tell themselves not to overthink. It's not worth it, they say. But Machiavelli would disagree, because that harmless moment is never harmless. It's a test, not of your strength, but of your boundaries. In the world of power, every interaction is a negotiation of dominance. And disrespect, subtle or blatant, is an opening move. The question is, will you play or will you fold? You see, people don't just observe how you handle power. They learn from it. When someone disrespects you and you do nothing, you're not seen as noble. You're seen as weak. And worse, you've just taught everyone watching that you're safe to ignore. Machiavelli understood the brutal psychology of power. Respect isn't given, it's enforced. And the first mistake people make is believing their silence is strength. But silence without strategy is just surrender. Here's the truth. The moment you feel that shift in energy, when a person tries to diminish you with a joke, a jab, or a smirk, you must not respond emotionally. You don't snap. You don't defend. You go still. Because your first and greatest weapon is strategic silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of cold, deliberate withdrawal. You cut the energy instantly. You don't smile. You don't nod. You don't play along. This is the first Machiavellian law of respect. The person who reacts emotionally loses authority, but the one who becomes unreadable becomes dangerous. Why? Because unpredictability creates fear, and fear commands caution. Disrespect thrives on attention, on laughter, on justification, on appeasement. But when it hits a brick wall of stillness, it withers. The room shifts. They feel the void. And now, they're uncertain. And uncertainty is power. Most disrespect is not a declaration of war. It's a probe, a flick, a push. And when they see that your surface doesn't ripple, they start questioning everything. So here's what you do next. You hold their gaze just long enough. Tilt your head just slightly, and calmly ask, "Did you mean that how it sounded? Want to rephrase before I respond? Is that how you talk to everyone, or just me?" That's surgical tension. That's a controlled incision. You're not insulting, you're not attacking. You're offering them a rope to either pull back or hang themselves with. And most won't double down, because they're not brave. They're opportunistic. They didn't expect you to see through them. They didn't expect to get exposed. And now, everyone's watching. You've just reframed the entire dynamic. You're no longer the one reacting to disrespect. You've made them explain themselves to you, and that's when the real game begins. Because now, they feel doubt. And doubt, to the Machiavellian mind, is more powerful than fear or approval. Doubt rewires behavior. Doubt changes tones. Doubt makes people tread lightly. This is how you plant the first seed of power. In the next part, we'll explore the psychology of consistency, why one good reaction is not enough, and how you reframe the entire relationship without saying a single aggressive word. Because this isn't about dominance. It's about removing their access, quietly, permanently, and with surgical control. Stay with me. The next move is everything. So you've held the line. You didn't flinch. You didn't play along. You responded with silence, measured, unreadable, unforgettable. And now, the air has shifted. But here's what most men get wrong after that moment. They go back to normal. They joke again. They smile again. They pretend it never happened. And in doing so, they reopen the door that disrespect just walked through. Machiavelli would call this the fatal mistake, because one good reaction is not enough. In fact, it's just the beginning. The moment you let your guard down, you send a dangerous message. That boundary wasn't real. You can test it again. So now it's time to reframe the relationship permanently. You don't do it with words. You don't explain or lecture or justify. You do it with presence, with withdrawal, with distance that feels cold, calculated, and irreversible. This is step 2 in the Machiavellian playbook. You redraw the lines, quietly. Your tone sharpens. Your warmth vanishes. Your availability becomes selective. You don't say, "I'm upset." You show that their access is revoked. This is the psychological shift that hits hardest. You become polite, but formal. Cordial, but closed. Present, but distant. And here's the twist. It's not about punishing them. It's about educating the room. Because the room is always watching. Friends, co-workers, acquaintances. They saw the moment of disrespect. They saw how you responded. And now, they're watching your consistency. Machiavelli taught that a public correction is more powerful than a private one. When done right, it doesn't just neutralize a threat. It sets the tone. It shows everyone. This is how I expect to be treated, and anything less will be met with silence and removal. This is presence through principle, not performance. You don't need to yell. You don't even need to speak. You let the distance do the talking. Let them feel the absence. Let them wonder what changed. Let their own discomfort teach them the price of crossing you. This is when the social current shifts. They don't look at you the same. They don't speak to you the same. Even those who weren't involved begin adjusting, because they've witnessed something rare. A man who doesn't tolerate violation, not even once. And that's magnetic. People respect what they don't fully understand. They adjust to the unknown. And your silence, when timed with discipline, becomes a mirror, one they're forced to see themselves in. Now let's go deeper. This isn't just about one incident. This is about training perception. In the minds of others, you must become unreadable, not moody, not dramatic, but principled, distant, sharp. The ones who try again, the ones who think you've softened. That's when you deploy the next layer. Disproportionate consequence. Not revenge, not insult, but elevation. You rise while they shrink. You move with clarity while they stumble for relevance. You respond to their next comment by looking at someone else. You answer their question with a one-word reply and then walk away. That is removal. That is power. That is the message Machiavelli mastered. You don't get to violate me twice. Because when you allow access after disrespect, you teach the world that your value is negotiable. But when you subtract presence without drama, you raise your worth in silence. And the beauty of this tactic? It lingers. They think about it. They analyze it. They bring it up to others. Did I do something wrong? What happened? Why did they change? And the answer is simple. You changed the terms. You're no longer playing the emotional game. You're playing the power game. That's what Machiavelli would advise. In part 3, we'll expose the predators, the ones who thrive on disruption and testing limits, and reveal the next level strategy to not only shut them down, but turn their aggression into your social leverage. This is how power isn't just protected. It's multiplied. By now, they've felt it. The shift, the silence, the cold withdrawal of your energy. Most people will never cross you again. But there's always one. The disruptor. The boundary tester. The one who doesn't respond to shame, presence, or silence. They don't want approval. They want attention. They push not because they're bold, but because chaos is their currency. These are the social predators, and for them, basic defenses won't work. Machiavelli had a strategy for people like this. Expose them. Not emotionally, not physically, but socially. Because people like this thrive in the shadows, in implication, in the unspoken. So what do? You make their disrespect visible. You force them to own it, out loud. You don't get angry, you get surgical. You say, "That's an interesting joke." Do you use that at work too? If that's how you talk to your friends, I wonder how you treat people you don't like. That's bold. Surprised you'd say that in front of everyone. That's not a comeback, that's a spotlight. You've taken their little performance and turned it into a liability. Now the room sees them for what they are: insecure, attention-seeking, out of control. And here's the twist. You're still calm. You haven't raised your voice, you haven't insulted, but suddenly their confidence shrinks. Not because you fought them, but because you made them expose themselves. Machiavelli never struck first, but when he did, he made sure it was public, precise, and irreversible. This is Machiavellian retaliation. Not petty, not impulsive, but calculated. You become the mirror they never wanted to look into. And the worst part for them? You're unshaken, untouched, unbothered. While they're fumbling to save face, you've already reclaimed control without ever breaking your frame. And here's the real power move. You don't escalate. You don't turn it into a war. You turn it into a lesson, because once they realize their disrespect gave you more social credibility, they become hesitant. They overthink. They second guess. This is where your image evolves. You're no longer just someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect. You're now someone who uses disrespect as leverage. And from here on out, every room you enter recalibrates. People lower their voices, they check their tone, they begin to self-correct before they speak. And this is where most people stop. But you go one layer deeper. Because some people don't get the message. Even after the exposure, the tension, the distance, they'll keep testing. That's when you deploy the final tactic: unpredictability. You don't lash out. You don't react. You just become unreadable. They don't know what you'll do next. Will you call them out again? Will you go silent? Will you disappear entirely? That uncertainty becomes your armor. You've shifted the game from reaction to anticipation. They're now walking on glass, not because you made them fear you, but because you made them question everything they know about you. And in Machiavelli's world, power doesn't belong to the loudest man in the room. It belongs to the one everyone else watches before they speak. In the next part, we'll take this to its highest level. How to turn your reputation into your greatest weapon, so you never have to react again, because your silence alone will do the work. And that's when you go from being respected to becoming untouchable. What happens when you no longer need to respond? When you don't need to confront, correct, or expose, because the idea of who you are does all the work. That is reputation. And in Machiavelli's world, it's everything. Because when you master perception, you no longer have to play defense. The room adjusts to you automatically. Let's break this down. Every time you respond with precision, with silence, distance, or exposure, you're not just solving a problem in the moment. You're training the room. You're shaping your legend. People start whispering, "He doesn't say much, but when he does, you don't want to be on their bad side. Careful. She doesn't play those games." And now, you don't chase respect. You radiate it. But here's the secret. Reputation is built through subtraction, not addition. You subtract things like reactivity, over-explaining, apologizing for your standards, justifying your value, laughing at things that aren't funny, tolerating subtle digs and dismissals. Every time you remove one of those, you get sharper, more focused, more formidable. This is the Machiavellian paradox. You don't need to speak louder. You need to be felt more. So what does that look like? You walk into a room and people shift. The energy changes. They sit straighter. They choose their words more carefully. Not because they fear you, but because your presence demands alignment. That's reputation. And the most powerful reputations are built on two things: clarity of boundary, consistency of consequence. If people know they only get one chance with you, they take that chance more seriously. They weigh their words. They avoid carelessness. Why? Because they know you won't warn them twice. You don't chase drama, but you end it with finality. Now here's where the elevation happens. You stop responding to disrespect as if it's personal. You start treating it like data. Every time someone crosses the line, you don't flinch. You log it. Because disrespect is a reveal. It shows you where they are weak, threatened, or insecure. They didn't insult you to hurt you. They insulted you to feel something, to momentarily mask their own lack of power. And you saw right through it. That's when you make your move. You cut access, not with cruelty, not with rage, but with absence. And that hits harder than any insult ever could. They don't get to talk to you the same way. They don't get warmth from you anymore. They don't get to be part of your world unless they've earned their way back in, and most won't. Because you've made the cost of disrespect too high. This is when people begin speaking about you differently. He doesn't give second chances. She's sharp. Be careful what you say. You only get one shot with that guy. That's not intimidation. That's presence earned through principle. You've become the standard, the one people adjust for, the one they study before approaching. And here's the ultimate twist. Now they don't even consider disrespecting you, not because you threatened them, but because you've made it not worth the risk. And that is the definition of untouchable. In the final part, we'll unveil the closing layer. What to do when they realize they messed up, how to handle their regret without ego, and how to turn mercy into your final move of power. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing you can say is nothing at all. So now, they realize it. They disrespected the wrong person. They crossed a line they didn't know was carved in stone. And suddenly, the energy changes. They try to smile again. They crack another joke. Softer this time. They offer a compliment, or worse, an apology. Not because they mean it, but because they feel your absence, and it scares them. Here's where most people fall into the trap. They accept the apology. They reopen the door. They try to smooth things over. But Machiavelli would tell you, this is the moment of greatest leverage, not because you get revenge, but because you now control their perception of who you are. This is the final move. Mercy without warmth. Let them back in? Number punish them? Still no. What you do is far more chilling. You remain unchanged. No bitterness, no gloating, no smile, no comfort. You've already created a new reality. One where they no longer have access to the old version of you. Now they're just a ghost in your world. You see them, but they don't move you. You hear them, but you don't respond. They still exist, but not in your emotional landscape. And that haunts people more than anger ever could. Because they're not being punished. They're being forgotten. That's psychological dominance. And it works because you've proven you don't need their validation, you don't need their apology, and you don't need to teach them a lesson. You already did, in your stillness, in your subtraction, in your absolute refusal to explain why the door is now closed. And here's where your legend begins. Others notice this. They watch how you handled it. They see that you didn't explode, didn't gossip, didn't turn it into drama. You simply vanished. And in that silence, you built a reputation that speaks louder than any reaction ever could. People begin to describe you with reverence. He doesn't react. He just disappears. She doesn't raise her voice. She raises her standards. You only mess up with them once. And now you don't just have power. You have weight. You enter a room and the air shifts. Not because you demanded attention, but because your absence is always an option and everyone knows it. You've made disrespect too expensive, not through rage, not through revenge, but through cold, unbreakable discipline. And here's the brutal Machiavellian truth. You never have to defend yourself if you refuse to allow access to those who would ever violate you again. They can't hurt you if they can't reach you. They can't disrespect you if you don't even hear them. They can't recover what was never promised in the first place. And now, your silence says everything. You had your chance. You failed the test. And I don't repeat lessons. This is your legacy. Not dominance through force, but influence through selective presence. Because real power doesn't chase conflict. It walks away, and the echo is deafening. So let them wonder. Let them whisper. Let them feel the weight of your absence. You don't argue. You don't explain. You don't perform. You simply exit. And from that moment forward, they will remember you as the one who didn't need to demand respect. Because you made disrespect a mistake they'll never make twice. That's not just power. That's Machiavellian mastery. And that's how you become untouchable. Not by being liked, not even by being feared, but by being impossible to violate without consequence. No warnings, no second chances, only silence, and distance they never recover from. This is how you reclaim your frame, your respect, and your presence. And more importantly, this is how you become unforgettable.